kick off our first breakout session. It's my pleasure to introduce the team from Aromatech. We have Nicolas Coyon, he's a marketing project specialist. With a diverse background in sales and marketing, Nicolas has had the opportunity to make a difference through his internships, where he refined his skills through various hands-on experiences and has built a strong foundation in marketing, digital marketing, sales, and management. And we also have Elaine Sullivan, flavor applications technologist. She's a graduate from the University of Florida with her degree in food science. She has a background in product development and is currently the flavor applications technologist at Aromatech. Elaine demonstrates their flavors as final products and applications like bakery and craft beverages, and also helps innovate and develop new flavors for food and beverage companies. Whether it be inside or outside a lab, and leaning with flavor chemistry as a passion and profession. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, everyone. So first of all, thank you to all of you for being here today. It's a great pleasure to finally put faces on those people that we connect with online. So great to see you guys. The presentation of today is going to be about how we at Aromatech use flavor strategy for functional beverages. But today's presentation is not going to be necessarily about us, but it's going to be about you and how we can help you use flavors to your advantage. So let's start with something simple as a strawberry. So strawberry is one of the simplest, yet most complex flavors. It is known by everyone, yet depending on your experience, your cultural background, you may all have different expectations for that strawberry. Let's say you're born in the US, for example, strawberry may be associated with nostalgia, with candies. For me, for example, I'm from France, and the strawberry is more going to be associated with wild berries, so a strawberry that's freshly picked from the wood. It's not going to be as candied, but it's going to be more woody, for example. But back in the days, a strawberry just needed one thing as a flavor. It needed to taste like a strawberry. Now, in 2025, this same flavor has much more responsibilities. So first of all, the strawberry needs to be non-GMO. The flavor has to be 100% natural. It has to carry antioxidants, be rich in fibers, and clean label as well. So that same flavor carries much more responsibility. So much so that a strawberry isn't just a strawberry anymore. So now let's zoom out onto the functional beverages market. So we've all seen it in the recent years, functional beverages everywhere. A beverage that does something for your gut, for your well-being, for your immunity, for your energy, for your mood, for your sleep, and so on. So now consumers, you and I, when we consume a beverage, we don't just want to taste, but we also want the beverage to do something for us. We want the function. Hence, the functional beverages flavors. So, as you can see right here, we have a boom that is still ongoing on those functional beverages. Right now, the global market is evaluated at $150 billion, all the way up to $250 billion in 2030. This is a nearly 9% growth year after year. This is why it's so important to get on the trend now, before it's too late. Also to note, about 39% of consumers now, they prioritize gut health when they purchase a drink in 2025. So the three main drivers of that growth of the functional beverages can be explained in three categories. So we have gut health, so it's going to be all your prebiotics, probiotics, and also everything that you would associate with the well-being. So it's no longer just the gut health, but it's the connection between the gut and the mind. We now have energy and focus. So it's not just about Red Bull, Monster, but it's also about those cleaner sources of energy. It's going to be energy drinks that will give you a boost without the crash, allowing you to have a sustained energy throughout the day through cleaner sources of energy. And then we have calm and mood, so it's all the beverages that will calm your mind, help you wind out without losing control. So you want to unwind, but you still want to be the one in control. So let's start with gut health. So as I was saying, it's not just gut health now. We do associate the gut with the well-being. So we want flavors that will reflect that well-being. It can be flavors such as ginger, for example, that already has some anti-inflammatory properties, but also can be lime, that we already perceive as clean flavor. And the players are going to be players such as coffee, that we all know, also all sorts of kombucha. And so for those, it's really important to have a flavor that will make the connection between the functionality and the drink, to make the function pleasant. And we also want to be able to cover the tastes that will be brought by the fiber, so as to get away from this traditional medicine taste. About energy and focus, so as I was saying, it's new players, so we have Celsius, more recently, that uses other alternative for the energy. And as cleaner sources of energy, we can have guarana, for example, we can have guayusa, we can have tea extract. And so for those products, we're going to be looking towards flavors that will reflect this energy. So it can be your typical orange, or it can be more punchy tropical fruits. It can be passion fruit, mango, pineapple. And we also have berries that we find a lot in these new energy drinks. And finally, we go into the calm and mood. So for that, we have recent brands such as Euphorics that will use nootropics, mushrooms, in order to calm your mind without making you lose control. So for those beverages, we typically want flavors that reflect this sense of calm, and that we will associate with infusions. This is why we typically have floral, botanical flavors, and also flavors that we associate with that functionality, such as lychee and white peach, that we will typically find in all sorts of tea already. So now I have a little question for you guys. Based on the cues of the beverage on the left, what function do you think is researched here? What function do you think is going to be completed by that beverage? Does anyone have an idea? Energy? And for that one, okay. And for this one, why energy? Why is that so? Orange, yeah? It's bright, okay. So, as you can see, we are biased already by those visual cues without even tasting the drink. There's also the flavor, of course, orange cream. So orange is something that we associate with the breakfast, with waking up, and hence why we find it in so many energy drinks. You also have the vibrant colors, of course, the punch that you have in that visual, that all convey a sense of motivation and energy. And then for this one, it's going to be more pastel colors, more calm. And peach and lavender is typical flavor that we find in those beverages. Now, I want to take a quick look at the psychology behind those flavor choices. So what's interesting is that I've noticed over the years that we have expectations on the product that we consume before even trying it. So many anchors and psychological bias are going to be playing in how we perceive a flavor. So we have the emotional anchor. As I was saying with the strawberry, we will be associating the flavor to memories, for example. So that's why every year we see a lot of s'mores coming back. We see a lots of classic cola flavor, ginger, root beer, all those flavors that people grew up with and that are attached to. And this is why lots of brands, when they start onto new categories, they will try to use those nostalgic flavors in order to create a sense of comfort. Then we have the mood flavor connection. So some flavors already carry this perception on the mood. So for example, a chamomile will be perceived as a calming flavor, whereas the orange or the citrus is going to be more energetic flavor. So we already have those influences on our emotions without even trying it. Then we have the mix of the new and recognizable. So when you go browse in the store and looking for a new product, you don't want something that is going to look like a risk to you. You want something that has an anchor. You want something that you're familiar with. But you're not going to get just the classic orange flavor. You want something new. So you're going to get the orange marshmallow, for example, because it both have the reassurance of the orange, but it's also something that you've never seen before. It can be a pineapple that you mix with a chili. And so in this way, you get to try new flavors based on the reaction that you have with the first one. Then of course you have the sensory expectations. So it's going to be all those cues, visual, the color, the texture, for example. Like a sparkling texture is going to give more energy. And then we have the aroma. So all those visual sensory cues are going to signal the function right even before we try the product. And so all of those anchors are going to play a role in the trust that we have in the product. So let's say you walk in the aisle of a supermarket and you see a vanilla flavor, but the product is blue. It's going to create a disruption because typically when you think of vanilla, you think of something white, creamy, but you don't think about blue flavor, for example. So it's going to create a disruption and a distrust into the product. So you have to make sure that the product that you sell is being coherent in all of those anchors. So now on to those three pillars, the gut health, energy, and focus, and the calm and mood. They all have expectations already. So gut health, as I was mentioning, is going to be flavor cues that we already associate with functionality, such as ginger, cucumber, basil. We're going to have aroma cues that are herbal, grassy, and we're going to be looking for a thin mouthfeel texture in order to kind of mask the mouthfeel that you get from the probiotics. For energy, it's going to be citrus, a lot of citrus, but also tropical, bright fruits. It's going to be sparkling. This is why a lot of energy drinks, as I was saying, are also sparkling, with lots of tropical esters. And then for the calm and mood, it's going to be more vanilla flavors, floral, lavender, creamy flavors, velvety, with lower acid. And so all of that is going to play in the final perception of the product. So now, I'd like to talk briefly about Poppy. Because I'd like to talk about how a brand can, by playing with all those cues and anchors, create a disruption in the functionality beverage market. So Poppy was created back in 2016 under the name of Mother Beverage. It used to be an apple cider vinegar-based product, and it started getting popularity back in 2018 when it was featured on Shark Tank. Then, after this presentation and introduction to the market, they decided to completely rebrand themselves. So for that, they used Be Gut Happy, Be Gut Healthy slogan in order to already position themselves as a healthy player. But they got away from this medicinal image by playing with bright colors, nostalgic flavors, And classic ones, so of course you have your classic cola, you have your root beer, you have grape, strawberry lemonade. And so when you align the sensory cue, the benefit claim, as well as the packaging, you end up with a product that not only tastes right, but also feels right. And this is how you end up bringing functionality without making any concessions on the taste of the product. So now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Eleni. She's going to be entering more into details on the technicals and how you can make your functional beverage actually taste good. And you go.
Thank you, Nico. So, designing the perceptual sweet spot with less sugar. So we have lots of alternative sugar options these days. So a couple examples we have here are aspartame, which is about 200 times sweeter than table sugar. We have sucralose, which is about 600 times stronger than table sugar. And it's actually considered the most natural tasting because it is derived from sucrose. I do want to address that there are some concerns surrounding artificial sweeteners like aspartame, that sometimes it may cause cancer or disruption to gut health. However, we are exploring other options and it's still being researched, so this is unconfirmed. Currently, we have things like allulose and monk fruit that are safer options, and monk fruit is about 100 to 250 times sweeter than table sugar. And the reason why we have this range is because when we're extracting the monosides, the concentration can vary. So how do they work? So artificial sweeteners work by binding to receptors on our tongue that help us perceive sweetness. And then it sends signals to our brain that say, hey, this is pretty sweet. The way we're able to achieve 0 and low calorie claims on our products and labels is because they are so much sweeter, we're able to use them at a much lower dosage to still achieve that 1-to-1 ratio. Another reason is that artificial sweeteners, most of them, are unable to be metabolized through our bodies, such as sucralose. We also have other artificial sweeteners like aspartame, which is metabolized into amino acids. When we're using artificial sweeteners, they can tend to taste bitter, and that might be a little confusing since we're using sweeteners, so we think it should taste sweet. But this is because of something called dual receptor activation. And so what that means is when we use artificial sweeteners, they're binding to our sweet receptors and also our bitter receptors. It's hypothesized that the reason why it tastes bitter is because artificial sweeteners bind using hydrophobic bonding and hydrophilic bonding, whereas table sugar binds hydrophilically. So we also have something called perceptual modifiers, like acids, aromas, and mouthfeel enhancers that also help give the illusion of sweetness. While we're talking about this, I do want to make a note that taste and flavor are not the same thing. So taste is the sensation on our tongue. So think sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and recently umami. Whereas flavor is an entire sensory experience. So we're thinking things like texture, temperature, aroma. And actually, 80 to 90% of our perceived taste comes from our sense of smell. And then about 10 to 20% actually comes from our literal mouth and tongue. So a really good example of this is Skittles. So if you were to pinch your nose and taste a Skittle blind, it would be really difficult to figure out what flavor it is because so much of our perceived taste comes from what we can see and what we can smell. Color psychology also plays a big role in this. Like Fruit Loops, for example, they're all the same fruity flavor, but people seem to think that they're different flavors because they're different colors, and we have different associations with colors. That's also the reason why blue raspberry even became a thing, because the market was so oversaturated with other red fruit flavors like strawberry, watermelon, cherry. We decided instead of adding another red fruit to the list of reds, we made it blue. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the building blocks of flavor strategy. So bioactive ingredients help us put the fun into functional beverages. Sometimes when we add certain raw materials into our products, they can create unwanted or undesirable off notes. And like the saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them. With flavor pairing strategies, we can lean into the bitternesses, the astringencies, and earthinesses that they can bring and build a flavor profile around them rather than against them. A common thing that you'll notice with these bioactive ingredients is that they tend to lean bitter, so we're going to focus on flavor pairing strategies that work with this bitterness. Adaptogenic. So this is all about stress relief. This helps our bodies regulate our stress hormones like cortisol and calm ourselves down. These do happen to lean earthy and bitter, and so we can pair them with things like citrus or pomegranate that are a little bit tart to help cut that bitterness, or even warm flavors like cardamom or cinnamon, which help add layers and depth to our beverage. We can also use natural sweeteners like honey, maple syrup, agave, and these natural sweeteners help round out the earthiness and bitterness that they can bring as well. Ashwagandha is a very popular adaptogen that maybe some of y'all are familiar with, and with fall upon us, we can pair them with warm flavors like ginger and something creamy like vanilla to create the perfect match that we can pair together and reduce this bitter earthiness that they can bring. My personal favorite adaptogen is ginseng, and I'm a little biased because I'm Asian, but it tastes really good in tea, and I enjoy the super sweet fruits like plum, because if you're not used to this, it is a bit pungent. So next we have nootropics. So nootropics are all about giving our brain a boost. They help with our neurotransmitters like serotonin or dopamine, and they help stimulate, regulate, and modulate the chemicals in our brain. Who here had coffee this morning? Raise your hands. Lots of us. So congratulations. That means that you've had a nootropic, which is something that we all know and love, and probably our favorite, which is caffeine. There are also other nootropics out there, like several of the amino acids, like L-theanine or creatine. They can also help give our brain boost. So nootropics pair really well with things like acidic grapefruit, lime, lemons, things like that, and even dessert flavors like mocha, vanilla, things like that. They also happen to be bitter. As I said, our common theme is bitter. So we can use things like bitter blockers, like beta-cyclodextrin is a great option to help with those unwanted notes. Now the way beta-cyclodextrin works is it traps those hydrophobic, bitter-tasting molecules in something called an inclusion complex. And now that it's trapped inside this little bubble, it blocks it from our taste buds. So then we're able to feel the intended flavor and not the off notes of bitterness. Another thing we can do is lean into it and go the other direction, like dark chocolate, for example. So we can, kind of like in math, it's like PEMDAS where they cancel each other out. So you can use dark chocolate with the bitterness of nootropics, and then they actually end up working really well together. Next we have prebiotics. So this is all about our gut health, right? They work by having non-digestible fibers that work through our bodies, and they help us create a happy and healthy gut microbiome. So alternative fiber options are something that we might want to consider when we're working with prebiotics, because they can kind of add a thick viscosity or gel-like texture. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't want a thick beverage when I'm drinking it. So other fiber options that we can consider are things like cassava, inulin, wheat dextrin that help add that benefit without the texture or even off notes. Now they will still have some off notes, so how do we work with that? We can add fruity flavors like passion fruit or mango. We can add berries, which is my personal favorite, to help mask these fiber notes. Or even cucumber and mint, as Nico mentioned earlier, it adds to the psychological effect of health and wellness that our consumers know, love, and enjoy. Lastly, we have electrolytes. So we have hydration, which is a classic. And so sometimes when we're adding electrolytes into our beverages, they can be a little bit salty. So we can mitigate this issue with a simple temperature switch. So instead of serving them at room temperature, we can serve them ice cold, because colder temperatures help suppress the saltiness and also reduce the taste of minerals. Citrus is also a really great way of cutting this bitterness. And at our booth, Aromatech at 610, we are promoting our blood orange pomegranate hydration lemonade, which has magnesium glycinate, potassium citrate, and sodium citrate. And so after this presentation, you should go check us out. So overall, I would say don't be afraid to try something new, mix multiple flavors together, try the unexpected, because that's honestly the beauty of this industry. And it's what makes my job so fun and exciting as a flavor technologist, because we do get to innovate and be creative and try new things. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. Next, we're going to talk about formulation. So from bench to shelf and claims that you can make on a label. First, we need to talk about pH. So as a food scientist, that is our magic number, 4.6. So even in school, I remember we joked around about getting it tattooed on our bodies because it's literally such an important number. I haven't done it yet, but the 4.6 is so important because it's the safety zone for preventing CBOT, or Clostridium botulinum. A great example of why pH is so important outside of safety is its enjoyability. So pH contributes to probably the collective reason and how we all feel about Dasani. Who here likes Dasani water? Nobody? Okay, so this is a safe space. We can talk about this. Okay? So Dasani is basically purified tap water, and the optimal drinking pH of water is about a 6.5, and Dasani is about 5. So it's very acidic, and that's typically why most people don't enjoy Dasani. And for reference, Smart Water is about a 6.5, and even like Zephyr Hills is a 7.7. And so I just wanted to emphasize for us that pH outside of safety is also very important in terms of consumer enjoyability. Next, we have stability factors. So stability is a non-negotiable. It literally affects everything from safety to consumer acceptance, brand reputation, efficacy, and if it's not stable, then that leaves us at risk for microbial growth or changes in texture or appearance, and obviously that's not something that we want. There are 3 types of stability. So we have physical stability, ingredient stability, and sensory stability. So ingredient stability for functional beverages refers to things like antioxidants or vitamins that are prone to degradation from things like heat, oxidation, or light. Physical stability focuses on maintaining the intended taste, texture, appearance, and making sure it doesn't separate over time. And then sensory is its overall desirability. So we're looking to make sure that it looks and smells like it's supposed to. Okay. Also, in regards to stability, things that we can do to mitigate it are obviously stability tests. Considering appropriate packaging, so we're thinking about oxidation, UV light protection, considering things like processing steps, so like pasteurization, high temperature filling, and then of course our ingredients. pH is also something that affects our stability, and we can add buffers to help maintain this pH, flavor, and its quality as well. Then we have my favorite, which is sweetness and carbonation. So something that I think is cool is that when we increase carbonation levels, it increases our perception of sweetness without adding additional sugar. A great example of this is McDonald's soda. I don't know if anybody here prefers McDonald's soda over other fast food restaurants, but it's not for no reason at all. It's because they actually add more carbonation into their beverages. And so then that increases our perception of sweetness, which increases our likability and us coming back for more. They even use wider straws, which means that we're getting more of the beverage in every sip, so they truly have optimized the drinking experience. Another really interesting fact about carbonation is bubble size. So smaller bubbles are typically perceived as higher and creamy quality, and they have a more delicate bite, as well as longer lasting aromatics. Whereas something with a larger bubble size can have a harsher bite and even be perceived as cheaper. Ways we can control pressure size are things like, ways we can control the bubble sizes with pressure. So when we're entering the CO2 into the beverage, or liquid to gas ratio, or even the temperature. So there's a lot of factors that we can consider when approaching bubble size in our carbonated beverage. Lastly, we have regulation. So the four main categories as defined by the FDA are drug, medical food, conventional food, and then dietary supplement. So a conventional food must add taste, aroma, or nutritional value to your product. Dietary supplement means something like a vitamin, mineral, or herb, or something of that nature. Medical food needs to manage a condition with medical supervision, and then drugs must be curative, of course, so they need to treat or prevent a specific disease. Since functional beverages don't have their own category, they typically fall under dietary supplements or conventional food depending on what functionality that they're bringing. A great example of what happens when we don't follow one of these four categories is what happened to coffee. So they were in a giant scandal and lawsuit because they were making false claims on their beverage, and so then they kind of had to do a little PR switch there. So it's very important that we are following the FDA guidelines. Other things that are required for a beverage and regulation are things like the nutrition facts panel, ingredient list, and then our allergens, of course. So how do we de-risk your next launch? First, we have to consider product development, of course. So if it doesn't taste good, then people aren't going to buy it. We need loyal customers to keep coming back for more, and so we need to make sure that we're focusing on things that our consumers like and taste good. Whether it be masking, flaving pairing strategies, or a combination of both, they help us maintain and preserve this functional experience while also utilizing their benefits. Then we have to consider our shelf life. So we need to test that thoroughly for color, flavor, and stability over time. And not only does it need to be safe, it needs to look as it should. People shop with their eyes first, and then they eat it second. And so I think sometimes we forget that we have to shop with our eyes first. So it needs to look, not only be safe, obviously, but it needs to look good too. Then we have our production scale. So considering how things are going to be changing from lab all the way up to production and manufacturing. A big factor is usually heating steps that we want to focus on, because if they're going under high heat processing, sometimes their flavor can flash or there could be degradation. So ways we can mitigate that are by knowing the final processing steps, and then we can switch like a solvent in our flavor, for example, to change the flash point accordingly, or even change up the order of methods of our production steps so we can avoid degradation. Then we have supply chain. So it's important that we make sure that we're diversifying our supply chain in case they run out of what we need, they're unable to deliver on time, or even it gets too expensive and we can't afford it, because we have to think about cost as well, of course. And then lastly, we have regulatory. So a common theme here is that we're going to emphasize on marketing on scientifically tested variables. Any false or misleading claims obviously are liability, and we don't want that, and our consumers value transparency and authenticity. And then, of course, we need to follow our FDA regulations for mass substance uses, ingredient permissions, and labeling. And like I always say, if it's not safe, then we can't do it. It doesn't matter how cool, trendy, or tasty it is. Safety first. Okay.
Thank you so much, Emily, for this breakdown. So what have we learned today? So we have learned that flavor is no longer just taste, but it's also a story and a signal of function. It's a way to make your function more appealing. Every function, gut, energy, con, as we've seen, its own flavor fingerprint. And lastly, through science, stability, and sensory design, we can make functional beverages that are both effective and enjoyable. Thank you, everyone.
Does anyone have questions?
Hello, I'm Caroline. I have a question. So you mentioned a lot about functionality and flavors. Is there any flavors you see in the protein space?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. So I know protein has been growing a lot in the recent years. We see it everywhere, not only in beverages, but in literally every food. The reason why I didn't include it here is because it's already its own matured category and no longer such a driver growth. But there are a lot of flavors that we can work with for protein. It's really important because it has a really bitter and it's really important not only to mask the flavor. So that's why we would use more indulgent flavors like chocolate, vanilla. When you see all the protein shakes, for example, it's going to be lots of strawberry, chocolate, vanilla, maybe sometimes cookie cream. So you have to make sure that the flavor is strong enough to cover the protein taste, but not overpowering either. So it has to be something that we are already familiar with. And as for upcoming, I see it more evolving towards more exotic flavors. For example, if we're talking more about dairies, in yogurt we already see passion fruits emerging, but also lots of berries. So I would say, yeah, keep an eye on those exotic profiles in the following year, but also the nostalgic ones for now.
Hello, thank you. This was awesome. So you talked about regulation, and I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about changes in the federal landscape, especially maybe around ingredients or GRAS, and how you imagine this is going to affect the functional beverage space.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so with regulation, it is constantly changing and evolving, and there's a lot of speculation around safety and any certain side effects. And so I would just say that we need to focus, like I said, marketing on scientifically tested things and making sure that we're focusing on not making any false claims and we're not like over exaggerating. And so it's better to under promise and over deliver kind of thing. So like in terms of like the FDA, like I'm not the FDA, so I can't control what they have to say. But just following their guidance and making sure that we're staying compliant, of course.
Also something, because it's a really good question, that I would add is that we're seeing that consumers nowadays are more and more aware of what's on the label. Back in the day, we would not necessarily read everything on the label. Now we do. So that's why it's important, not only for the flavors, but for any other ingredients to be as clean as possible. Because in the long run, that's what is going to constitute your solid customer baseline. Because in the US, for example, because this is the market we mostly work on, we're seeing this shift tremendously reshaping the market. In Europe, it's been there for a long time already. Natural ingredients are the norm. Here, it's coming. It's going to be the norm tomorrow. It's already today in some beverages, but this is what we're evolving towards in the US.
Yes, so how do you see the movement towards natural colors impacting the functional beverage manufacturers?
So while we do not do colors, it's of course important to keep in mind that the color is really important. It's the first thing we see when we look at the beverage. It's important that it reflects the product that we're going to be trying, but if it's too bright, we're going to back away from it. If we see, I don't know, if we see a raspberry lemonade that's pink, bright, Barbie pink, like we're not going to... I know there was this pink sauce a couple of years back that really did a lot of waves, but the thing is that even if it was a big hype for some time, it's not sustainable on the long run. So I would say that the color, it's important to keep color similar to the product without leaning into the too flashy and bright. And as for the ingredients, we see a lot of spiruline, for example, emerging, and lots of more natural ingredients. So I would say in the long run, it's more about what you use for the colors rather than the color itself. Because we're going to be, I include myself as a consumer, looking at that more thoroughly in the future.
Great presentation. I'm Hedley. I had a question about how do you ensure like flavor consistency and flavor stability when the functional ingredients itself start interacting during over shelf life?
Yeah, so we test this a lot in the lab to make sure that there's not any off notes, and so I'm doing stability tests on my end of like 1 week out, 2 weeks out. We're also switching up dosages, so like what is the ratio of like flavor to functional beverage, which obviously is going to vary from what you're doing. But yeah, like obviously we're just going to try to like test this out and make sure that through and through it's stable because like I said, people shop with their eyes, so if it's like separating or it looks like a weird color, you know, they're not going to buy it. And so stability is like one of our number one concerns that we're focusing on. So yeah.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. So my question is, what's your decision rule? Like you guys were mentioning, you guys are doing pairing and also masking. So let's say you have caffeine and polyphenols, you know. So are you guys, you know, like how do you decide to go for either pairing or using some masking? You know, like are you guys using any, you know, like receptor modulation or something like that?
Yeah, so we have sweetness modulators, sour enhancers, things in our lab and our company that we can use to alter that. For us, honestly, we just taste it and then we're kind of going to be like, ooh, this is really bitter and these flavors are like strong enough on its own. And so then we will use a masker with the flavors together and then they work together. But honestly, it kind of just depends like what, you know, the consumer is looking for. That's how we kind of determine that.
Hi, my name is Julia, and I was kind of wondering how you plan to market all of these new kind of flavors and ingredients to your customer base, especially maybe to unaware customers of like what the ingredients could be for them, and maybe some that might be skeptical of the functional beverage space.
Yes, so that's also a very personal question, especially in this in 2025. So what we will do and what we've been doing for some time now is that we are very customer-centric. So we will work exclusively based on the demand of the customer. If they want something natural, we will do natural. We will only work on that regardless of the taste. If it tastes better with natural and artificial, we will not count that in as they want natural. So we're going to use that as our basis. Now regarding novelties and upcoming ingredients, what we like to do is use limited edition flavors and seasonality to introduce those, not only flavors, but also functionality novelties. So this is how, I would say in the flavor industry, we managed to get away from the classic strawberry, vanilla, because this is, at the end of the day, strawberry is going to be the most purchased flavor and the most required one because that's the safety net, right? But when it comes to novelties, we want to create a safety net for those consumers that will not only buy it once, like we want to make sure that they try it, but we want to make sure that they purchase it again. So this is why we, I would say, use seasonality and limited edition first to introduce those ingredients to the market in the first place.
Hi, my name is Scott. Great presentation. I just have a quick question. When you use modifiers, particularly for bitterness, do you concern yourself whether those modifiers can destroy the efficacy of some of the alkaloids and bitter compounds, and if, you know, in reference to a bitter modifier or something like that, that are lowered significantly?
That's a great question. And so when we use bitter blockers, we want to obviously consider all of the functional aspects with something like, you know, our protein powders or nootropics or something like that. I personally haven't seen that, however, we're still like working on it. It's like new in our lab, at least like at Aromatech, as we're like entering this new space. But I think that's a great question and definitely something that we can look into as well.
All right, if no one has any more questions, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure meeting you all. And thank you so much.